The Soldier Who Upheld and Defended the Constitution. By Jorge Javier. It was the February of 1986. I was 13 years old then, and on my first year of high school. The snap election was just held involving President Ferdinand E. Marcos and his opponent Corazon Jorge Aquino. The wife of Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., who was assassinated in 1983 upon his arrival at the Manila International Airport, now known as the Ninoy Aquino International Airport. During the time, the media and the political opponents of President Marcos had portrayed that Manila was in chaos. I remember the party of Jorge Aquino and the Catholic Bishop of the Philippines CBCP, which was headed by Cardinal Jaime Sin, saying that President Marcos was no longer in control of our country, and that our economy had become unstable. It was made to appear that the administration of President Marcos was a mockery, that President Marcos was a dictator, and that there were a lot of oppression and killings happening in the country. But what we have observed then was the popularity of Jorge Aquino only in Metro Manila and the CBCP's intervention with the politics of the country. Several personalities and the majority of the populace in Metro Manila had apparently believed them. Being confused, I asked my dad if these allegations against President Marcos were true. He said to me, "You know, my son, these people are not against the administration, but they are already going against the Constitution of our country." It was then that my dad had explained to me that, being a soldier, it is his duty to follow the Constitution and his obligation to protect it, and whoever goes against it. The armed forces of the Philippines, the institution which he belongs, will always intervene to ensure the survival of the Filipino nation. There was no social media then. That was why the people rely merely on media as shown in the television, heard from the radio broadcast, and seen in the photo journals and newspapers. But for us, as the family of a military man, we could monitor what was happening in the whole country, from the military camps down to the battalions that were scattered throughout the country. Although Metro Manila was full of demonstrators and political rallies, my dad had received reports that the other regions in the country were not similarly situated. My dad was assigned in Fort Bonifacio. He was not able to go home for almost 1 year since the military then was always in full red alert. Just to see him, we would pass by his office after school. We would have a chit-chat with him for an hour. The most of it was him asking us our status at school, and us reporting to him our performance, most especially our conduct, if we were well behaved. This became a routine, and we thought that it was normal for him not to be around our house even on weekends. Although sometimes, I would ask our mom why our dad was already living in the camp. In fact, it came to my thoughts that my parents were already having a marriage problem. My mom told me, "You know, George, your dad loves his duty as a soldier and he will sacrifice himself for that." It was then that I realized the patriotism of my dad to the country. I used to describe patriotic persons just like the ones I see in the movies about Vietnam War or World War II, though the protagonists there were Americans. I felt proud that my dad was like one of them. I could not believe that my real father is a patriot just like in the movies. This really changed the way I look at him, because what rang in my mind was that he was a poor person. As he repeatedly told us, "You know, I grew up as a poor person, but I told myself that it is only me who can end poverty to myself and change the status of my well-being." But then I understood why he always continued his statement with, "It is okay to have less, but the important thing is you live with dignity and honor." These words of my dad had inspired me until now, which words I had instilled in my mind and in my heart. It was February 21, 1986, a Sunday. My dad phoned my mother again in the landline. He said that his battalion was asked to move to EDSA. To our mind, that was normal considering that there were several rallies being held there. The Philippine Army formed a CDC battalion tasked to disperse the unlawful rallies and illegal demonstrations in Metro Manila, most especially in Mendiola, Manila. My dad was the ground commander assigned in EDSA. As I remember it, it was early morning, at around 7 a.m., that we heard that there was already a military movement in EDSA. The day passed, and it was only around 8 p.m. that our dad was able to contact us using a handheld radio. He told us that General Fidel Ramos and Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile had already took the side against President Marcos. This made my mom shiver as she immediately asked us to pray for our dad. But to us siblings, we thought again that it was a normal thing with our dad. The next day, or on February 22, 1986, it was already in the television and radio broadcast that a big crowd started to rally in EDSA. My dad radioed us at 6 a.m. and said that they were still in EDSA but were already armed with weaponry. The CDC battalion stationed in EDSA, which had tanks and artillery, was under his command and disposal. We then monitored him through the news. We oftentimes heard the word, defect, which became very popular in the news as the media would always say it when some government troops and even generals would join General Ramos in Camp Crame. My dad radioed us again to inform us that he was with a general from the Integrated National Police. INP was the counterpart of the Philippine Army's CDC battalion composed of police force from Manila. He said that the INP general had asked him, "Colonel, tell your men to stay behind my men because we will lead the front." My dad was, however, amazed because the INP general's men were only equipped with batons and riot shields. To his total surprise, the INP general suddenly walked straight to the gate of Camp Crame and went inside the gate. He actually did not want to think of the INP general committing an act of cowardice, but he really felt bad about it, and just said to us. The police general had also defected, joining General Ramos' group. It was an incident that made him feel that he was abandoned and disgraced. Nonetheless, he held his head up high and ordered his men to strategically position themselves with their equipment, and to prepare to engage in a battle. I remember my dad telling me that he was able to speak directly to President Marcos through radio. The then president told him, "Colonel, you stand down and you will listen to my orders," to which my dad replied, "Yes, sir, you are the president." On February 23, 1986, my father radioed us again and relayed to us about their condition, that they had not changed their uniforms and that they were using the comfort rooms in Patron EDSA for bathroom breaks. I asked my mom if I could talk to my dad, to which she agreed, and thus I was able to ask him, "Dad, what's defect?" When he explained to me the meaning, I said, "Dad, don't do that," and he answered, "I will not." He also told us that he was receiving calls and pressure from the commanding general of the Philippine Army and the chief of staff. They had been ordering him to attack Camp Crame, but he refused to follow them because of the instruction of President Marcos to stand down and to follow only his orders. These really struck me. My dad is really patriotic. I even checked the Webster dictionary to look for the definition of the word defect, which, according to Webster, means abandonment. On February 24, 2023, several generals had defected and joined the side of General Ramos and Secretary Henry Lay. Another general, who is one of my dad's close friends, rather, who is like a brother to him, was also inside Camp Crame. The general radioed him saying, "Bach, I'm here inside, why don't you join us and bring your men?" My dad replied to him, "I'm under the direct orders of the president and just waiting orders from him, I can't do that." The general then asked him, "Would you shoot me?" My dad said, "Bach, I will let you know if I get my orders and directives." My dad got the chills after that call. He muttered to himself, "I will close my eyes and pray, but will follow whatever orders will be given to me." Then, my dad noticed that the people were shouting, "Marcos flee." He approached a certain journalist and asked if it is true that Marcos had fled to the United States. The journalist said, "Yes, Colonel." My dad began to cry. He radioed us and said that they are going back to their camps. After the EDSA revolution, a lot of military officers who did not defect were removed from their posts. They became the so-called floating, which in military term would mean jobless, as they were not given assignments. My dad was among those officers who went on floating status. I saw him how he grieved, but made it appear to us that he was strong. He even told us, "Don't be sad about me. I just did my job as a soldier." The Constitution was later amended by the administration of President Cory Aquino. Even with the change of the administration in the Constitution, my dad decisively stayed in the military. Some officers with floating status were able to have assignments, and fortunately, my dad was among them. In fact, he was promoted as a general by President Cory Aquino. He was directly interviewed by President Cory Aquino, and when she asked him, "I heard that you were among the last Army officers in EDSA who were on the side of Marcos, and you did not defect. Now I am the president, will you do the same for me?" My dad straightforwardly answered, "Yes, Madam President, because you are the president under our Constitution." During his stint under the administration of President Cory Aquino, my dad had experienced 7 coup attempts. He never joined any military adventurism and had remained loyal to our Constitution. Every time that the EDSA revolution is celebrated, the journalist whom my dad approached would always mention his name in his column in the newspaper and would affirm that a certain colonel approached him and asked if Marcos had really fled. Although I am not a military man, I can say at present that I was molded by the virtues and principles imparted by my dad. I will never forget him saying, "Life is what you make it. It is all up to you. But you should have honor." These words I will cherish forever. My dad's name is Brigadier General Eliseo J. Javier. He belonged to the Philippine Army. He died in 2019 and now lies at the Libingan ng mga Bayani. June 8, 2023.